Dante's Inferno was released in February 2010 for the 360 and PS3 systems, made by Visceral Games, the EA studio formerly known as Redwood Shores, who also made the Lord of the Rings game for the PlayStation 2. Unfortunately, the timing did not do this game any favors. Inferno came out just 4 weeks before the highly anticipated God of War 3 for PlayStation 3, and ever since has been disregarded by many gamers, with people diminutively summarizing it as a God of War clone. Unfortunately, they're not entirely incorrect. The gameplay is similar in many ways to the original God of War games, featuring many of the same core mechanics such as platforming, puzzle solving, collectibles, upgradable movesets and magic powers, epic boss fights, button mashing QuickTime events, and it also has a story similar to God of War, and many of the themes are also similar. That said, the games couldn't be more different in the actual story. God of War was a Greek mythological tale about a soldier who was betrayed by the gods and lost his family. He sought vengeance and so goes on a quest to kill the god of war, Ares, who he blames for his situation. Dante's Inferno is loosely inspired by the book of the same title, or Canticle, the first canticle of the Divine Comedy, finished by Dante Alighieri in 1320, just before his death in 1321. In the game, Dante is a soldier during the Crusades, a Templar knight, who we find out throughout the story betrayed his fiancée and his brother-in-law, as well as his principals and many of his comrades. He dies while stationed at Acre during an attack by the Islamic forces led by Saladin, and then spends the entire game trying to atone for his sins and rescue his wife, or fiancée, who he promised himself to, and he made a promise to be chaste before going off to the Crusades. He spends the entire game trying to atone for his sins and trying to rescue Beatrice from hell after he returns home and finds that she's been murdered. Throughout the game, Dante's story is primarily told using in-engine cutscenes as well as animated shorts, which spring to life from the tapestry he sewed into his own chest. While the 3D cutscenes tell the story of what's happening in the present timeline, the animated shorts, which are the same as the animated movie Dante's Inferno, which was released alongside the game on Blu-ray, continually expand upon the backstory by showing what Dante himself or other characters in the story, like his father or his brother-in-law, did before the game began. Often these animated shorts are framed in the context of Dante's current circle of hell, such as his father's callousness and greed being shown right as Dante descends to greed, the fourth circle of hell. In addition, Virgil, who himself was a poet during the time of Augustus, famously wrote the Aeneid, appears frequently to provide lore details about the current circle of hell or about a specific location within that circle, such as the River Phlegethon, or Charon the Boatman, or the Wood of Suicides. You can talk to him multiple times each time he appears, although some of the dialogue eventually becomes interchangeable throughout the course of the game. Most characters of note in Hell, such as bosses, specifically the first example would be King Minos in Limbo, seem to be apprised of Dante, his story, his past, and why he's in their realm, often taunting him regarding his quest to save Beatrice or about the sins that he's committed in the past that caused him to go to hell. Inferno didn't win any awards for best visuals. In fact, it wasn't nominated for any art-related awards in 2010 or 2011. And it's easy to see the game wasn't pushing any graphical boundaries at the time. Funny side note, the game was actually nominated for 7 different awards in audio design by the Game Audio Network Guild, although it didn't win any of those either. Many of the assets in the game, such as the damned walls, where Dante climbs on a webbed mass of bodies, are noticeably two-dimensional animated textures, for example, although they do differ. Overall, there's a fuzzy look of low fidelity to the entire game outside of the pre-rendered cutscenes. In most of those cutscenes, certain aspects like Dante look much better, but because the game was only rendering at 720p when it was new, it definitely shows its age. The high fidelity of many of the spell effects seem to intentionally be a stark contrast to the normal, muted and dreary appearance of the hell levels around you. Whether it's the caster enemies in Heresy that cast purple lightning, or similar, the enemies in Lust that cast the purple shield spells, or other magic attacks like Sins of the Father, which unleashes a flurry of ornate golden crosses to hit enemies around you in order to protect Dante. All of the spell effects are very bright, very crisp, and stand out very sharply against the background textures. That said, the visual design of the game itself, the actual art, is amazing. Visceral did a fantastic job of designing each individual circle of hell the way it is actually described in Inferno, the book on which the game is loosely based. Each circle has unique visuals and sounds that identify it as being that circle. Although many assets can be seen reused in the other circles of the game, it's always obvious which circle they belong to. For example, Limbo is almost entirely composed of bland gray colors and neutral tones that have no life to them. In the second circle, Lust, the purple and red palette and the overt sexual imagery make it obvious what the Lust circle is about. Gluttony is filled with disgusting creatures and bile and demons gorging themselves on flesh. Greed is entirely covered in gold, with many giant bubbling cauldrons of liquid gold pouring into vats. There are entire lakes of gold. Even many of the basic enemies that can be seen in many other parts of the game look different depending on which circle they're in. For example, in the Greed circle, the basic skeleton enemies can be seen with tattered remnants of golden armor on certain parts of their body, as well as certain enemies that are unique to the different circles. Greed has Hoarders and Wasters, which have a giant golden morning star. They can always be identified what circle they're from because their design never changes throughout the game. You can always see a giant golden morning star, especially when they start doing their circular attack. Perhaps the most impressive visual areas of the game on an epic scale are areas like Limbo, ruled over by King Minos, and the city of Dis, a sprawling circular city full of tombs and fire. These areas give the grandest sense of the epic scale and imagery of hell, one that has been the most readily embraced in the real world by Western religion for centuries since the publication of the Divine Comedy. One of the most general similarities between Inferno and the God of War games is the sense of an epic adventure, taking place in epic environments among statues and structures that are bigger than life. God of War seems to do this more conspicuously, because so much of the game is set in temples or lost cities, or generally outdoor environments. Inferno has plenty of these scenes, but because it was designed around the circular hell concept, there's a noticeable sense of restriction to the environments. Everything had to make sense to fit into the circular design of each level of hell. Those scenes that did make sense enough to be included are stunning. Inferno uses a simple combat system rooted in wielding two movesets that can be leveled up from the beginning of the game once Dante's two main weapons, the Unholy Scythe that he rips out of the Grim Reaper's hands when he kills him, and the Cross of St. Lucia, or otherwise referred to as Beatrice's Cross, have been acquired in the first chapter. After obtaining the cross, Dante can freely choose when fighting enemies either to punish them or absolve them of their sins using the scythe or the cross respectively. Doing so awards Dante with souls. As Dante travels through hell, he also gets the opportunity to punish or absolve 27 different historical figures, which grant souls, just like killing an enemy or doing anything else in the game would do that grants souls. Punishing gives a base amount of souls, while absolving starts a minigame, which generally awards more souls when done well. Once all three of the Beatrice Stone items have been collected, this minigame actually plays itself and automatically grants you the maximum amount of souls available. Although, the third Beatrice Stone can't be acquired until the Gluttony chapter, which is about a third of the way through the game. Souls are used in the game's upgrade menu to unlock new moves on both the Unholy and the Holy trees. Additionally, punishing or absolving enemies of their sins increases Dante's Unholy or Holy power level respectively, which grants access to newer powers. These levels of power are represented on the UI health bar as a crown of thorns. Each power has 7 levels, and you can see 7 thorns on each side of the crown. By defeating bosses throughout the game and looting collectibles, as well as using the normal upgrade menu, Dante also gains access to certain magical powers, which can be used to interrupt certain enemy attacks, increase damage at the cost of health, blind enemies, or grant multiple other temporary benefits. Throughout the course of the game, Dante also can pick up holy and demonic relics through secret collectibles, as well as certain story events which gain additional passive boons. These relics can be leveled up as the game goes on, as Dante collects more souls, to a maximum level of 3. Each level of each relic changes the passive bonus to that relic. For example, Francesco's Forgiveness can grant up to a passive 15% damage resistance at level 3. Other powers are things like the Coin of Plutus makes it easier to maintain combos by increasing the time you can wait between successive hits or after being interrupted in the middle of a combo. The Death's Blade relic increases scythe damage, and many other benefits. All in all, there are 31 different relics that can be collected throughout the course of the game, some of which duplicate benefits, some of which don't really grant anything useful in combat, such as automatically looting fountains instead of having to mash the B or the circle button. The combat mechanics in Inferno give a lot of different options to deal with enemies and have fun doing so, but the same criticisms that apply to God of War thoroughly apply to Inferno. Even with every single ability in the game unlocked, certain combinations of attacks and certain specific attacks are going to be the most effective, or sometimes the only effective, attacks for dealing with bosses or even average enemies. Flying enemies essentially cannot be killed except by spamming cross attacks from range, or alternatively waiting for them to get into melee range and jumping into the air. Hoarder Wasters can only be interrupted by using the frost magic spell, Righteous Path. Ultimately, even on hellish and infernal difficulties, magic is almost never needed except during the last boss fight, when you can use Martyrdom to heal yourself, or Righteous Path, again, to interrupt Hoarder Wasters. The other spells have their purpose, but you can generally overpower enemies without ever having to waste any mana to use your magic. From nearly the beginning of the game until the end of the game, including during the last boss fight, Dante will have to platform to get basically anywhere in hell. This includes a lot of double jumping, and not just double jumping, but changing directions in midair or double jumping over obstacles and staying on the same platform, jumping on or off of obstacles that are collapsing, swinging on ropes, sliding down poles, for lack of a better term, actually poles made of human skulls, ropes made of human flesh, using the scythe as a grappling hook, usually in midair and mid-fall off of another platforming segment, and dodging a lot of environmental hazards like fire or wind. The timing required is strict to avoid damage or instant death, and often the most challenging parts of the game are just trying not to die from these platforming segments due to jumping at the wrong time or not understanding the right timing due to the camera angles or misjudging the distance of a jump. Some sections of the game also include basic puzzle platforming involving timing jumps correctly on, like I said, moving platforms or moving switches while fighting enemies or moving platforms while fighting enemies. Sometimes moving switches on a timer in order to lower a wall or raise a platform. Sometimes having to destroy an obstacle in the way in order to continue moving a switch. Various different combinations of simple platforming, many of which will cause you to die if done incorrectly or imperfectly. As previously mentioned, Inferno was nominated in 2010 for 7 different audio awards by the Gaming Audio Network Guild, but received no other critical recognition for its audio design, and did not receive any of the awards for which it was nominated. In addition to the audio being a crucial element of creating believable but distinct circles of hell, Inferno also features an original soundtrack by Gary Scheinman and Paul Gorman, which is every bit as epic as the score to God of War when it's appropriate, but also atmospheric when the game is building the mood. Many parts of the soundtrack bear a resemblance to the musical Inferno by the Hungarian composer Franz Liszt, such as the initial descent into Acheron, or the segment where Phlegyas stomps his way through the city of Dis. To summarize, I'm going to go off script instead of writing anything down for this, because I hopefully don't want this to last any longer than it needs to. To call Dante's Inferno a God of War clone, I always felt was just intentionally dismissive. People said it just to be assholes, pretty much. It's a fantastic game. It has brilliant art design. The level design also ties into that. Everything, basically, the sound design, the art design, the visuals, the effects, the level design, the character design, they're all really interwoven, and they all combine to make a believable experience. I never personally finished the first book of the Divine Comedy, Inferno, because I just honestly couldn't. I was bored. And I'm pretty sure this was before the game even came out. So this was back when I was still studying classics. I just couldn't do it. It's too much. It's too boring. And I didn't feel like doing it anymore. I made it maybe 100 pages. So again, I just don't understand why people are dismissive like that. Like apparently there aren't allowed to be things that are similar. The video gaming market apparently only has room for one thing, and then there can't possibly ever be anything similar to that thing, according to some people. Or I don't know if it was this PlayStation fandom, like being protective or something of quote unquote their franchise, even though, you know, they had absolutely nothing to do with making God of War, other than perhaps making it successful because they bought it, which still isn't even to their credit, because what else were they going to do? The system, I mean, PlayStation 2 didn't really have that many first-party exclusives. PlayStation 3 had even less first-party exclusives. And we're not even talking about 2018 God of War, because that's a different storyline. So again, I just don't get it. If you haven't played Dante's Inferno, I suggest finding a way to do it if you're interested. It is really a game worth playing. It's not going to be the exact same experience as God of War. I mean, pretty much you're looking at a difference between pagan mythology and Christian mythology. There is a little bit of overlap, like Dante's Inferno does have Cerberus as one of the bosses. But that's the only actual specific overlap in the game. There isn't a single other thing in the game that has anything to do with Greek mythology, Greco-Roman mythology, even. Other than the shades, like the damned souls. Some of them are Greek, no doubt. Some of them are Roman, no doubt. Obviously, Dante's Inferno being Italian. But that's where the similarities really end. It's much more of a tight, much more of a focused game than any of the original God of War games were on PlayStation 2 or 3. I don't remember how long they were, but Dante's Inferno really isn't that long of a game either. You could beat it in like 5 hours. Depending on difficulty, you could beat it in far less. And then especially if you're using resurrection mode, you could beat it even faster than that if you put it on easy. I mean, because it's like basically impossible to die. And in addition to the story, there are a couple of pieces of DLC. There's like the Trials of Saint Lucia, and a couple other modes like challenge levels. I believe you can also create a challenge, or you used to be able to, or a trial, I guess it would be called. And then like people could vote, upvote or downvote your trial or whatever. I'm pretty sure those features are impossible to use now, whether you're on PS3 or you're on Xbox. I'm not even sure if you can play the game on PS3 anymore, other than using it. RPC S3, on which the game runs perfectly, but there is still a way to play it. That's literally the one reason that I kept my Xbox 360 around for so long, is because you couldn't play this game anywhere else. It wasn't until like the past year where it was actually playable on emulator. So the game is $15 if you do want to buy it. One last little thing. If you do actually own the game, There was a point in time where you could stick your disc into your Xbox, and then Xbox Live would detect the disc, and it would be like, oh, hey, this game is on the back compatibility list, so I'm going to give you a free digital copy. However, as soon as they added EA Play to Xbox Game Pass, they screwed that up. So that deletes any digital copies of EA games that you had in your library, unless you actually bought them online. Like, so basically the what do you want to call it? Like the gratis copies or the complimentary copies or whatever the word is. Those basically got deleted, and it wasn't just for EA games, it was also for Microsoft games. So like Gears of War 1, Gears of War 2 or 3, whatever, they just got flat out deleted. So if you are intending to play it on Xbox, you're gonna have to use a disc, or you're gonna have to buy the digital version. There's no in between. You can't what I'm saying is you can't put the disc in and then get a free digital version anymore, which is a pain in the ass, especially if you have an Xbox Series S, because you obviously can't put a disc in it. You would have to still have an older Xbox. Anyway, fantastic game. I personally would call it a masterpiece. The gameplay isn't perfect by any means, but the art design, the sound design, the visual effects, the story, the music, the ease with which the combat system works, even the platforming, which is more challenging than it needs to be. They're all awesome. It's one of my favorite games, so if you haven't played it, I recommend you check it out.